If you thought RTX 4090 coolers were ridiculous, look at what could have been. This is claiming to be pictures of, well, I mean, look at this thing. It's definitely not the 4090 cooler that we're seeing. I mean, look at the direction of the fins and all of that, and look at how thick this thing is. This is supposedly screenshots of the cooler designed for the 900 watt peak power GPU that we had seen rumored, but looks to have been scrapped for now at this point. Now, where are these screenshots coming from? And I mean, it looks like there's a lot of them here. I'm getting this from videocards.com, although I guess their source is from a chip hell post being tweeted on Twitter by @9550pro. But yeah, this looks like it's the ridiculous cooler designs for what could have been that, 800 to 900 watt Ada Lovelace GPU. Maybe that's that Titan that we had rumored and seems to have been canceled, but it does look like some coolers were at least being, tested and all of that, and they look crazy. Now, speaking of crazy and frustrating, so we saw RTX 4090 GPUs launch, sell out for the most part, and then within a week come back at an increased price, or at least we did see that at the for the RTX 4090 Supreme Liquid X. Now, the good news is that we're actually already seeing MSI back down. Now, MSI's official comment here is that they are saying that the increased the increased price on the MSI US online store was the result of a miscommunication, and that the MSRP of the 4090 Supreme Liquid X remains at $1,750. Now, the big part, whether or not we believe this was a miscommunication, the most important thing is that the company will refund the price difference to anyone who did purchase the card at the increased price. Now, again, that's like a 20% price increase compared to the launch price, and that's within a week. And this is a really frustrating thing that we saw happen with the RTX 3000 series, was that a lot of times when a new GPU would launch, we would see them launch with some models available at MSRP and some a bit higher. But then we would then see them come back into stock and sold by the GPU manufacturers themselves, the AIB board partners, at increased pricing compared to that initial launch wave. And that was really frustrating to see. And to me, I don't buy that this was a miscommunication. I mean, maybe it was. But I think what this was MSI testing whether they could do this again with the 4000 series. But, without crypto to support people paying ridiculous prices on things, I mean, it might be a little harder to sell. And not only that, in general, they just got a really big backlash on Reddit and places like that, and so they did back down. Again, I'm not buying the miscommunication. We saw MSI, like speaking of the RTX 3000 series launch, when those cards first started, within a month or two, we saw the really terrible scalping beyond what we see with normal GPU generation launches. MSI was caught with subsidiaries scalping their own GPUs, and again, they tried to say, oh, that was like a rogue branch and all of that, but I'm just saying there's a lot of weird stuff happening over at MSI with these GPUs being sold above pricing, and this seems to be a pattern, and that's what I have to say about that. Now, what I have to say about this is I've been reporting that we're seeing RTX 3060 Ti's coming in, it looks like, with GDDR6X memory. The normal version comes in with GDDR6. Now, we hadn't seen these cards officially announced, so keep that in mind. We also hadn't seen what kind of performance benefit we might see. Now, videocards.com here is saying they've confirmed with their own sources. Let me kind of get myself over to this side of the screen. But they're saying we managed to confirm some details on the new card. And videocards.com, usually when they say they have confirmed something with their sources, I found them to have a pretty good track record. I do think they have contacts with AIB board partners who would be in the know here. It seems to be the case. Anyway, so they're saying that all models they're aware of will ship with 19 gigabit per second GDDR6 memory, which is the same speed as the memory in the 3070 Ti. And that means that basically this card will fill the already not huge performance gap between a 3060 Ti and a 3070. I'm wondering if the normal 3060 Ti's won't be produced anymore. Like, is this going to replace the 3060 Ti with the GDR6 memory? Because again, there's not a huge performance gap to fill here. And it's looking like in the results that the board partners have, based on the results that we saw, the RTX 3060 Ti GDR6X will be 7 to 10% faster. And again, this is in synthetic benchmarks. So depending on the game that you would be playing, some games are more or less sensitive to memory bandwidth. So you won't necessarily be getting that same performance benefit in every game compared to synthetic benchmarks, which can usually respond well to things like that. So it'll be down to, specific details. Now, apparently, this was... using the same GA104-202 GPU, boosting up to 1665 megahertz. Anyway, the other thing that they said is that originally board partners were saying that this was going to launch by the end of October. However, that does not appear to be the case anymore. Or they say nothing has changed in that regard, but AIBs have a lot of stuff going on, they're saying. So they're expecting NVIDIA to move the launch date into November. So basically that's not confirmed. So basically, what are we getting out of this? There's gonna be a slightly faster RTX 3060 Ti coming out, possibly the end of October, maybe into November. That's not official, but again, board partners are dealing with a lot right now with the cancellation of the 3080 12GB. We'll see what happens. I'm curious with this refresh, if this means that NVIDIA is planning on leaning into keeping their 3000 series mid-range around longer and maybe delaying any kind of actual 60 class or lower 4000 GPU, but that's just kind of speculation on my part. But this seems a pretty late time to be releasing an update to your 3060 Ti. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. Now, speaking of lower-end 4000 series cards, although 4070 is not exactly low-end, Moore's Law is Dead apparently has photos of the actual 4070. And by the way, I don't mean the 4080 12GB that's getting rebranded, meaning the actual 4070. So if that 4080 12GB gets rebranded, I would expect it to be a 4070 Ti, although we don't have any official word on that or anything. But this is not that, okay? So Moore's Law is Dead is claiming, at least, to have photos of the actual 4070 and then to have commissioned a 3D artist to make a three-dimensional render based off of those photos. And that's what we're seeing here. Now, why would they bother doing that? Well, the photo itself is more likely to compromise your source if it's leaked directly, whereas a 3D render based off of those photos is less likely to compromise your source of your information, of the photos. So anyway, that would be the explanation for why you would go this route on this kind of thing. I think that's pretty standard for phone leakers and things like that to do this as well. Anyway, so what can we learn from the designs? It does look like it has the what do you call that fan design? Is that the axial fan design? Where it kind of goes in one end, out the other, which is different than the 3070 was, but is similar to what was used on the 3070 Ti. Now, whether that's just to go for a more consistent look or whether it's to go with, actually needing the more cooling, we have yet to see. Again, it looks like these Lovelace chips can be power efficient when you keep them within their efficiency curves, but cards like the 4090 were just pushed very far outside their efficiency curve for launch in order to hit maximum performance. Now, what I'm really interested in is just what sort of price and performance we get on an actual 4070, not so much what the Founders Edition looks like. I mean, it looks pretty consistent with what we're seeing on other cards. Now, don't forget that today we should be seeing Intel launching their 13th gen Raptor Lake CPUs, so keep your eye out for those reviews. And all of that, we're expecting to see some pretty good performance here. And again, performance to dollar is what I'm always interested in. I'm thinking about upgrading my test bench. Right now I have a 5950X, which is still great, but cards like the 4090 can get CPU bottlenecked easily. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I'm sort of tempted to wait for the X3D chips on the 7000 series from AMD, but hey, let's see what sort of performance numbers we get off of these 13th gen Raptor Lake chips as those reviews come out. Now, this is kind of interesting. Let me slide this way. So AMD, it looks like, is publishing a new GI 1.0 open source global illumination tech. And this is under the GPU open umbrella. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a game developer. Some of this stuff is a little bit over my head. It looks like they're claiming that this approach for real-time global illumination with have quality comparable or superior to other solutions while reportedly performing great and being open source. The image comparisons we're seeing here look like they're comparing the software version of Lumen from the Unreal Engine 5 engine, not the hardware version of Lumen. Whereas the GI 1.0 that AMD is showing here is using hardware traversal. So I don't know. To me, that doesn't seem quite fair. Do I just not understand because I'm not a game developer or something? But Lumen has a hardware accelerated version, so why are we comparing to the software accelerated version? That seems a little bit weird. Maybe if you are a game dev and understand this a little bit more than me, you could dig in here. They're saying that GI 1.0 employs two caching systems and aims to provide efficient global illumination for real-time rendering pipelines without the need for any content pre-processing, while still delivering high lighting fidelity. So it does look like it's relying on a caching system, which I do think sounds a lot like how I understand Lumen operates. But again, I'm not a game dev. Some things are a bit over my head, including this review. This is from chipsandcheese.com, and I'm going to link this in my description, and this is just massive. I'm going to scroll through it while I give you some of my thoughts. This is huge. This is benchmarking Intel's Arc A770, but it's micro-benchmarking it, meaning getting into things like the bandwidth, the cache scaling, all sorts of stuff, how it performs in different situations, memory latency, all sorts of things. But what I was interested in is, does this explain why Intel Arc underperforms in gaming compared to what Intel must have been targeting, given the power draws and just the size of these chips and all of that? They really do kind of underperform in games compared to what we want. Now, part of that is obviously the driver stack. But what I was understanding out of this article, and again, some of this I think is a little bit over my head, is it seems like the GPU performs really well at high occupancy, but not as well, it doesn't scale as well with lower occupancy. So, which I think, in games you can't count on that, the high occupancy. Anyway, again, not a game dev, not a graphics card engineer. I like price and performance and seeing the frame rate numbers go up and comparing that. But somehow all of this actually works. If you want to dive more into this review, I do recommend, I find it fascinating anyway. Link will be in the description. Now, speaking of GPUs underperforming, how about the one in the Xbox Series S? It's looking like a lot of developers are feeling hamstrung by having to make their game launch on the Series S if they also want it to launch on the Series X. And developers have been wishing that they could just not target the Series S because, well, a lot of the games that we've seen so far for next-gen consoles have been cross-gen, and so it was fine to support the Series S because they were also supporting the older GPUs. Now that some games are targeting next-gen only, a lot of developers are like, well, I need to make it run on the Series S if it's going to be multi-platform. And we're seeing some complaints about that. So right now, you kind of have to target your, Series S GPU mostly is the problem. Multi-platform games always have to optimize for the lowest performer. So apparently that's some complaints. And as we're seeing these next-gen only games come out, we're seeing some system requirements and performance that is pretty brutal. Like I tested out in the Plague Tale Requiem, and I've reported on some other system requirements. Well, this is interesting. We're seeing a Silent Hill 2 remake announced and will be coming to PlayStation and PC. And it looks like these system requirements have already been posted on the game's Steam page. And guys, for playing at low to medium quality at 1080p with stable 30 FPS, they're recommending a GTX 1080 and a Radeon RX 5700. Now, they're saying that if you want to play at 60 FPS, so it's saying medium quality settings 60 FPS, or high quality settings at 30 FPS at 1080p if you're not using upscaling. They're saying RTX 2080. I mean, they wrote it as 2080 RTX, but they mean RTX 2080. Or an AMD Radeon 6800 XT. Which is a lot, guys. That's a lot. Now, I'm wondering if these even medium settings maybe have ray tracing to justify this. I don't know. But definitely maybe the high quality settings they do. Anyway, now they're saying that you could even go up to 4K if you're using DLSS or similar technology with these GPUs. But I would imagine maybe that's like, DLSS or similar, meaning that they're probably offering FSR or some other kind of temporal upscaler in the game. Anyway, guys, a 6800 XT being recommended for high quality 30 FPS 1080p. Is that really what next gen games are gonna take? I don't know, guys, but that would definitely explain complaining about the Series S just not being up to the task. And notice that Silent Hill 2 Remake is saying PlayStation, so maybe they're not having to worry about that Series S compatibility. Or maybe this game is just going to be a horribly optimized mess and not even look that great. But, that's probably not the case, honestly. And there is a teaser trailer, at least, that you could take a look at if you're interested. Now, also in the news of PlayStation games coming to PC, we do have Uncharted on PC now. And I thought this was an interesting post from Naughty Dog talking about, this is the first game of theirs that they're porting to PC, and they talk about the learning process of thinking about the controls, supporting keyboard and mouse, having to optimize for all sorts of different hardware, make sure that it supports that. But this was a learning process, and they're also explaining that, well, first of all, it's a learning process, so I think this would probably be a precursor to seeing, the Last of Us and things like that coming to PC. But then also, they're explaining why they didn't release the Nathan Drake collection, which would have had the previous games. This is starting with Uncharted 4. And I think the idea was, they wanted to come out with a strong showing for their first PC release, and they didn't feel like the graphics of those older games would have held up without a major rework, a huge amount of effort to do that. Anyway, interesting little post if you want to take a look. Now I've got to go get my kids up and ready for school, so I hope all of you have an excellent day.